Nine, 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 and nine, 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 I nine, 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 nine. Shalom, shalom, wonderful friends. It is great to see you. Thank you for being here today. Looking forward to learning with you all today in our 10 Torah lessons on leadership. As we started our first session last week, I really enjoyed that conversation last week around pushing, but not pushing too hard. And now we're going to move to session 2 of Know Your Triggers. Know Your Triggers. Once again, the premise here is that when we're talking about leaders, we're not just talking about CEOs and presidents and the like. We're talking about all of us who exercise leadership in different ways. Know your triggers. Let's start with a poll question. What triggers you most? Faces and voices of politicians you like the least? Passive-aggressive behavior from people you're closest to? These days, almost everything is triggering. These days, almost nothing triggers me. So those are your 4 options. Stan and Cheryl, you have to come to an agreement together on what to vote for. No, not happening. Faces and voices of politicians you like the least. Passive-aggressive behavior from people you're closest to. These days, almost everything is triggering. These days, almost nothing triggers me. Okay, 45% say the faces and voices of politicians they like the least. I have no idea who they have in mind. Literally no clue who some of those people could be. 36% say passive-aggressive behavior from people you're closest to. 18% say these days, almost everything is triggering. And nobody says these days almost nothing triggers me, given that we're in an Israel-Gaza war, we're in a presidential election, we've got a whole bunch of tensions in the world and in society. This makes sense. So friends, today we're going to explore the importance for a leader of knowing their triggers. The word trigger, as I'm triggered, or trigger warning, or are you triggered, has recently taken on a lot of work and power in some circles. It's also taken on baggage as a cliche of the current identity culture wars. What do I mean by trigger? Everyone has situations they encounter that, because of their personal experience in life, will elicit stronger emotional reactions of one kind or another. Something that reminds you of a situation in which you were hurt and causes you to panic or freeze. Or something that reminds you of loss and makes you feel sad, even if the reminder itself is not inherently sad. Or a communication approach that makes you more angry than it would otherwise because of its association with a past trauma or upsetting incident. Or perhaps a particular style of interaction that arouses your interests. Or even some activity that brings you disproportionate joy. All of these possible emotional reactions to stimuli are natural and will be different for different people based on their experience of life. In other words, everyone is triggered in different ways and by different things. And as an important process of self-improvement for all of us, and especially for all of us in roles of leadership, is to learn about ourselves and to understand what stimuli trigger what emotional reactions in us. Some things our kids or grandkids or spouses or friends or politicians say just set us off. What situations or issues throw us off a place of connectedness to our values or our midot, our character traits that we have worked to cultivate? What causes us to lead from an uncentered, unintentional place? Rav Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, the first Ashkenazic chief rabbi of pre-state Israel, British Mandatory Palestine, wrote, "Know yourself and your world. Know the thoughts of your heart and of all who speak and think. There can be something of the psychoanalytical in developing this self-awareness. It can be helpful to investigate why we have the triggers we have. And on the other side, there's a behavioral, cognitive aspect of learning how to manage your triggers once you are aware of them. What shifts do you need to make? What techniques do you need to avoid operating reactively? We want to be clear that we are not advocating against emotion as a driving force of leadership. Emotions, including grief and anger and joy, are all valuable and important and not to be sidestepped or suppressed. But emotion should not be the only thing controlling us. And when we are triggered, one dominant emotion can take over. We want our reason and our deepest values also to always be present and influential in our leadership. Oftentimes, the way to handle a known trigger is to take a step away or slow down our responses so that our emotions have time to settle, or we manage to talk ourselves down from our activated state. But I also don't mean to advocate for slow, deliberate consideration as the only model of leadership. Zrizut, or alacrity, is also an important value in a leadership. Sometimes we need to respond and act quickly, or our opportunity to do good will pass. And we may even do harm through inaction. And another thing I don't mean to advocate is always avoiding encountering our triggers entirely. Sometimes it can be wise to outright avoid situations we know will set us off. But on the other hand, our most sensitive points are often exactly the places where we want to be leading, where we have great insights to contribute, and where we want to be growing in ourselves as well. So it's important to prepare and cultivate other methods to handle our triggers, in addition to avoidance and in addition to slowing down. What are the things that you have noticed activate you emotionally? Maybe not uniquely you, but especially you. They can be a way someone might interact with you verbally or non-verbally, a type of person, a type of obligation, a type of problem that arises. There's some things just about men that trigger women. There's some things just about women that trigger men. There's some things around age that people find triggering about young people or older people. What makes, like, my wife was pulling out of a parking spot recently, and some older woman yelled at her, "You millennial!" I was like, whoa, like we've reached that point where now, like, people are screaming at millennials, and vice versa. What makes you unusually angry or agitated or euphoric? What makes you feel dejected or not cared for or unworthy? I believe feelings of inadequacy is a particularly salient issue for modern people today. What triggers you to feel that destructive feeling that you're not enough? Or what sets you off into manic activity? Or what makes you feel uncontrollably sad? Personally, I can tell you about one of my own triggers I've come to recognize. I did not grow up with yeshiva-style discourse, and I found the Jewish culture of intellectual argumentation emotionally destabilizing. The oppositional style made me feel insecure. Every disagreement with my ideas felt like a criticism of me as a person. It triggered a competitive mode in me. I felt like I needed to be on the winning team of the yeshiva argument. When I came to understand what was happening in this kind of Jewish traditional argumentative style, I learned to recognize the signs that this emotional reaction was driving my behavior. I trained myself to remind myself in those moments to give myself the benefit of the doubt that they are arguing, to give the people the benefit of the doubt that they're arguing not from a place of mean-spiritedness or personal attack, but from their own convictions and intellectual, honest curiosity. As I gained experience in this whole new mode of interacting, this traditional argumentative style of challenging everything, I learned that I have much to profit from a pluralistic perspective that can hold multiple viewpoints, and told myself to remember that lesson when I felt triggered. And when I felt attacked, I need to take a moment to remind myself that the other person is probably arguing with ideas that are outside of me and not with the core of my being. Learning about this trigger of mine and how to handle it in the Beit Midrash, the study hall, was proved invaluable in my work in activist spaces. There, too, I encounter plenty of disagreement and argument in a context with even higher stakes. Do we want to uproot Hamas or do we want a ceasefire, right? Which VP is best for the country, right? And, what is the best approach to deal with racial bias in policing, right? Oftentimes you're on the right side or the wrong side, as opposed to an argument about ideas and statistics and viewpoints. Criticism of my campaigns can feel like a personal attack, just like criticism of my read of a text. And the same methods of recentering myself help me engage productively with arguments in my work in activism. Knowing your triggers is a vital piece of self-improvement for everyone in going through life. But it's especially significant in leadership roles. The stakes are higher when communities are relying on us, looking to us for guidance. At the same time, there are more intense influences on us, so it's easier to get detached from what matters most. And as leaders, we often have less time to process all of our inner workings in the moment. So it's vital for us to work through our own behaviors in advance. And finally, leadership is more about modeling good behavior than about making decisions or organizing other people to take action. We need to interact with people in a way that represents our values. Our internal equanimity provides stability for our communities and our causes. Pima Chodron writes in her book, How We Live is How We Die, the practice of halting or refraining is the most basic way of working with our cliches. Don't speak, don't act, get in touch with what we're feeling. It's the first method we need because when we perpetuate our storylines or act out, we don't have the mental space to apply the other two practices, transforming the emotions and using them as a direct path of awakening. The Jewish tradition is full of stories of leaders who struggle with triggers that derail their otherwise righteous, stable leadership. Moshe was overcome by anger when the people trigger him through their tiresome lack of faith, and he pays a great price for it. David HaMelech, King David's lustful response to Bathsheba, leads him to adultery and even indirect bloodshed. And he too must learn a hard lesson from this lack of self-control. And this may be a little controversial, but perhaps one might say, even God after the flood resolves, never again will I doom the earth because of humankind, since the devising of the human mind are evil from youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living being as I have done. Perhaps God is recognizing how God has been triggered and resolving to respond differently in the future, right? Than just flood the world when people go astray. God creates a rainbow as a reminder of that commitment. God tells Noah and his family, I will maintain my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God further said, this is the sign that I set for the covenant between me and you and every living creature with you for all ages to come. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature among all flesh, so that the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures, all flesh that is on earth. That God said to Noah shall be the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh is on the earth. So was God teaching a lesson? Was this God's maturation, so to speak? Was this humanity's maturation? Was this a triggering moment? We live in triggering times right now in the state of Israel. Where October 7th reawakened pogroms and crusades and Holocaust. And, the Iranian attack coming any day now triggers responses of deep trauma. And we hope we have leadership. I'm doubtful we do, but we hope we have leadership that can lead from a place of thinking of consequences and thinking of long-term stability rather than just of triggered moments. And we hope we can all play that role. And there's an interesting debate around whether assassinations like this are prudent or not. On the one hand, assassinations are justice. A person who's guilty of atrocities should be assassinated and taken out. That's what Pinchas does just a few parshas ago. And Pinchas is a zealot. But God awards Pinchas the covenant of peace, right? God seems to like Pinchas' zealotry. On the other hand, the civilians of Israel are going to pay a deep price for that act of assassination. And if Israel responds to it, the whole region may escalate, including the U.S. So these moments of being triggered are ones to check when we want to think long-term about stability and security. Note that the verses back here to Noah don't say that the rainbow is a reminder to reassure us humans. Twice God says that it is a reminder for God about how God has resolved to respond to certain triggers differently. The role of Noah and his family, which includes us, is apparently to hold God accountable to some degree to that covenant. We are called to model our moral lives after God. You shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy. God's example even includes lessons about correcting course and learning from one's extreme and unhelpful reactions. What are your gathering storm clouds? The signs that your judgment and higher purpose are being overtaken by a triggered emotional reaction. What covenant can you make with yourself about how you will approach these situations rather than just flood the earth? What rainbows can you seed that will bring you back to who you are and what you want to accomplish? Signs that will remind you what damage you can cause if you're not careful and remind you of techniques you know to change course. Let's walk in the way of God and ask ourselves these questions. One other typical case before I conclude and open up the conversation is, is in legal disputes. Sometimes one needs to settle. One needs to compromise. But it's very hard to do that when one is angry, when one is triggered by the other person or by the situation. But sometimes we need to, I don't want to say seek peace over truth, but see the triggers that are moving us to be unwilling to compromise. And there's so many other cases like that today. So friends, I invite us all to think about some of our own triggers. And again, that they're not all bad. These emotions can be very productive and generative. If we're triggered by someone politically, that can cause us to act. We can canvass. If someone is triggering us because we realize the dangers that they pose and the triggers are telling us a deep truth. And yet there's other triggers that can pull us out of our game. Think about the player who gets the technical foul because they throw a punch, or gets thrown out of the game and they kind of mess up their career, or people who throw away their whole career from a triggered moment. So, all right, friends, I'm going to pause there. Only 20 minutes. Wonderful. I would love to hear from you on some issues that relate to triggers today. Yes. Hi, Stan.
Good. Yeah. That was the scene of Noah. Was just a few parshas later, God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. I know we're always taught in the parsha slow to anger. I'm not so sure about slow to anger. What do you think?
That is a great counter argument. How can the same God who learned not to flood the earth then destroy that whole city? Well, I guess the counter argument, before validating your view, which resonates, is, one is the whole world by and large, and one is a particular city which doesn't have 10 righteous people. One is I guess on a technical level, one is a flood and one is a fire. But I think your point is interesting. Was that the only way to resolve such a situation? And did God really learn that mass destruction, doesn't work? So that's a great point. And Abraham seems to have learned. Abraham is 10 generations after Noah. So it's 10, it's exactly 10 generations since the flood. Adam is 10 from Noah, and then Abraham is 10 from Noah, and then Moses is 6 from Abraham. That gets us to 26. In any case, Abraham seems to have learned from that covenant that we shouldn't do that. Jonah doesn't learn that. Jonah wants the whole city of Nineveh to be destroyed. He is ready for that place to be lit up. He's the opposite of an Abraham. And yet over there, God seems to have learned. God seems to be a teacher of compassion to those who want to change, even if it's unconvincing that they will. But anyways, that's a great point, around another mass destruction that occurs. But one last thing I'll say there is, in both of those cases, people are not allowed to look. The Midrash says that the ark doesn't have windows, so Noah's not allowed to look at them being destroyed. And also by Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah, they're not allowed to look. If you recall, Lot's wife turns to salt. That's the explanation of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is said to be in the Midrash where this all happened. That's why it's salt. It's, in any case, what's the first time they can see is after the splitting of the sea, and the Israelites can then see the Egyptians drowning. And I think one way to understand that is, as individuals, we can't respond to mass genocide is too strong of a word, to mass annihilation. But as a community, because the Jewish people become Israel after they cross through that sea, once they become a nation, they're able to see it because they're capable of responding collectively. And so, anyways, I'm glad you brought that up, Stan. I don't know if you want to follow up on that point at all, or okay, great. Thank you for bringing it up. Yes, Eileen.
My question basically is being able to accept criticism so that you can grow without looking at it as a trigger.
Yes. Great. I think that's, so much easier said than done, for me at least. But yes, I think that criticism can be an amazing opportunity to learn. And obviously opposing viewpoints or anything that triggers us. One of the things they might say in psychoanalysis is go to the hot place. That place where there's tension, that's where the greatest learning is. That thing that's most agitating. So in fact, those places of greatest agitation, whether they're personal critiques, societal critiques, political arguments, that's sometimes where our greatest learning can be, in those places of triggers. If we're just resolved it, I'm on the side of good, they're on the side of evil. Like, why should I be so triggered by some viewpoint I know is totally false? Like, there are reasons, because maybe that idea will win in society, and that's pretty triggering. When we see 50% of a society that supports a view we deem evil, for example. But Eileen, I think your point is great. I think that if we can see those trigger moments as learning opportunities, and I think we could see a number of those cases in our tradition as well, where that happens, and I plan to bring up a few of those as we go. So thank you. Anything else to say there, Eileen?
No.
Great. Okay, awesome. Hi, Glea.
Okay, I'm trying to let you see me today. Sorry. Okay.
Great. It's nice to see you again.
One of the things that I wanted to also throw out there. Okay, so short version of the story. I used to have this whole I can't stand Republicans sort of thing going and all of this other stuff. However, though, I started getting the question in my classroom, well, what is the difference between a Democrat and a Republican? Now, then I had to start thinking in terms of my own, okay, value-wise, am I okay with telling these kids, no, don't be a Republican? Well, no, I'm not okay with telling them that and everything. So I had to go to okay, so here's, the bottom basic stuff about free market economy versus, government intervention and stuff like that and all of that other stuff. And then I'd have to say, okay, so are there legit arguments on both sides? well, yeah, there are going to be legit arguments on both sides, though. So at that point, though, what do you do next? I mean, you have to like go with whatever argument like resonates, with you. This is all I can tell you at this point. And then just, go from there. Like if they wanted to ask questions about like, what are the advantages here? What are the advantages there? Stuff like that. Now, the reason why I had to go to that is because, well, if you are letting your trigger get to you to the point that you become your trigger, and that's kind of where I was. It was like, I'm not, should I become my trigger because I'm so triggered by it? So I don't know if we want to like go in that direction or not, though. But I kind of think that that's kind of how it started working for me to like deal with triggers of like, am I going to start acting just like my trigger, basically? So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah, and I think on this point around political differences, we often think it's just about our values, right? I value X, Y, and Z, and the opposing political party, values the opposite. But I think Jonathan Haidt is really right here in showing how there are deep personality traits that lead us towards certain political positions that are just beyond just our values. They're much deeper in who we are as people. And that's partially why we're so triggered. It's not really just our view on gun control or gun rights or abortion or pro-life, pro-choice. It is partially about these types of triggering political issues, but it's much deeper in our personality as well. And that's why it's very hard to understand people. If someone's a centrist, maybe they can understand people just a little to the left of them or the right. But if someone's a hardcore liberal or hardcore conservative, it's very hard to relate to someone else's opinions if they're a lifelong liberal, lifelong conservative, in a way that's not very deep for them in terms of how they were parented, in terms of what their personality is around security and around freedom, around resources. And so I appreciate you bringing it up. And yet I think that one of the things that we're seeing, and I think you raised this, is the very things that people hate the most in the other side, people start becoming like that in their desire to win so much. Shapiro, Shapiro, whether people thought he was going to be a good VP or not, the level of anti-Semitism that would have come from the far right had he made it would have been through the roof. But the level of anti-Semitism that came from the far left over the recent weeks was through the roof, holding the same views on Israel as the other VP candidates, right? But because he was a Jew, just getting crushed for it. In fact, he was even more liberal than Waltz, and Waltz didn't get any pushback on his Israel, or very little on his Israel views. So, in any case, I think that this moment of this upcoming election is such a great opportunity for us to kind of reground ourselves in some of these around some of these issues. Yes, hi, Toby.
This is a slightly different tack, but hear me out. I'm a death penalty trial lawyer, and in most cases, it's to our advantage when we have a client. They're probably guilty of something, had some dealings in the murder, but it's usually in our best effects to negotiate, and that's what we do in 90% of the cases. But sometimes during the investigation of a case, you discover, as I did, some malfeasance on the part of the police and the prosecutor's office that exceeded the general level of malfeasance. And knowing this, I tried to negotiate with the prosecutor, who later lost his license, by the way. I tried to negotiate with the prosecutor without bringing any of this stuff to bear on the negotiation. And they refused to discuss with me. They were right and I was wrong and my guy was a murderer and whatever. The bottom line is what happened is that disrespect from the prosecution, talk about triggering, I ended up disclosing a whole bunch of information about police misconduct and prosecutorial misconduct that ended up in a whole bunch of Phoenix police officers getting fired and investigated And this particular prosecutor ended up losing his license. So there is, I guess the point I'm trying to make is sometimes when you've tried everything else in a way of negotiating, and this may pertain to what's going on in Israel today. Maybe there isn't, an out. I don't know. But I can tell you that sometimes in the criminal justice system, sometimes there isn't an out. Sometimes you just have to unleash the hounds for the better good. At least that's my viewpoint, and I'm sure people will disagree.
Toby, very interesting. Let me ask you a different but related question, if I may, Toby. How in the order of the court can we ensure that emotional triggers aren't leashed upon a jury? Because I imagine in death penalty cases, it would be easy for prosecutors to trigger a jury, whether into fear or rage around what was done. And are there ways to kind of limit the excesses of that?
Well, on both sides, and I will say that both sides will try and play on the emotions of the jury. It is illegal to do that. And the judge will warn the attorneys beforehand that they are not to bring up certain subject matter or to talk about certain kinds of things or make allegations. There's a whole bunch of rules that go on outside the purview of the jurors that are rules for the attorneys. But in a heated argument or in talking to a witness, sometimes these things have a way of getting out. And like the Supreme Court case says, you can't unring the bell. Once it's out there, it's very hard for a jury to disregard it. So the rule is the jury, if something comes out that shouldn't have come out from either side, the judge will admonish the jury to ignore whatever just happened. This should not be a part of the deliberation, et cetera, et cetera. But you can't really unhear what you heard. So the next step for an attorney would be to move for mistrial, which I have done on many, many occasions, and so has the other side. I will not tell you that I am blameless under those circumstances, but one side or the other will move for mistrial, and depending on the egregiousness of the error, the judge may in fact grant a mistrial, wherein you just start over. You pick a new jury, you go through everything again. So
very interesting. Also similarly in a death penalty case, if you're seeking a life sentence over death penalty, the case of mitigating factors of showing that the perpetrator was actually triggered, that it was a passion crime or an act done in rage or something, right? I imagine that's one of your typical moves, right?
That actually, if a crime is committed in passion in the state of Arizona, it can reduce a first degree murder to something called manslaughter, for which the punishments are much, much less severe.
Right.
So, and that's a state law matter. So I don't want to go into that, but yeah, if you can prove that, or if the person was mentally ill when they, committed the crime,
Yes.
there's a long list, but yes.
Yeah.
And things are taken.
So it's a good example of where being triggered actually works to someone's benefit, so to speak, in terms of saving their life. Okay, very good. Thank you, Toby. Very interesting stuff. Yes, Dr. Janie Heydrich, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. One of my favorite takeaways from today was the quote about whatever has occurred that's triggered your response, transforming the emotions and using them as a direct path of awakening. And I think to me, what it does is it takes a very egocentric victim attitude to something that's occurred and turning it into understanding and personal growth. And I think that is basically what happens anytime we respond to something that someone has said or done, that rather than focus on, oh, how could they do that to me? How could they hurt me? How could they not like me? Or whatever, to say, oh, I think I'm beginning to understand this person. I understand this person's values, so on. And then grow from there. How can I use this for personal growth? Because that's really what we're about, not focusing on our hurts, but understanding and growth.
Great. Yes, I love that. Thank you. And I also just want to highlight what you put in the chat. You cannot control what others say or do to you, but you can control your reactions and how they impact you. I love that. And for me, I know we've been talking a lot about anger. For me, it takes a lot for me to get angry. I don't get angry often at all, but I get anxious very easily. I get triggered to anxiety much more commonly than anger. And exactly to your point of looking at some of the things that people around me do that trigger some of that anxiety around security of myself and other people I care about. And regaining that power, the power of controlling that inner world rather than just being tossed and turned. And Jews struggle a little bit with anxiety. You may have heard the shpilkes. There are a lot of shpilkes in the Jewish community. It's like that old joke, a telegram arrives, a Jewish telegram arrives. It says, start worrying, details to follow, right? So it's like, so we feel like it's like productive to be a little nervous. It's like it's unfairly cast upon the Jewish mother. All the Jewish mother jokes. Oh, the nervous Jewish mother. She's calling her kid all the time, whatever the case is. But it's not. Jewish men have their own shtukas too, So, and all the stomach ulcers that come with dairy and everything else, In any case, thank you, Dr. Heydrich. Very interesting. Okay, David, and then Cheryl.
Hi. Yes. What a timely topic. Triggers and techniques to deal with them, and learning how to control your anger is so important on a personal level and on a global level. If it's just revenge, hurting each other, that's no good. So I loved when you said it's hard to compromise when you're angry. So learning those techniques to calm down, to take 5, to take a walk, to take a run, to tell your spouse, I'm feeling angry, I need some time, and then coming back to talk about it when you've got all those angry juices out of you, so important. And so what we do, I believe, the other quote I wrote down, thank you, Rabbi, is what rainbows can you see that will bring you back to help you change course? Because, there are rainbows. There are kids. There's the next generation. There's world peace. We should not be lashing out at each other. And that's, I think, why it says God is slow to anger.
Very nice. Yes, love that. Yes, exactly. The God who is slow to anger, we repeat again and again in the High Holiday Liturgy. More than anything else, to emulate this being, and Pirkei Avot says it again and again, we should be slow to anger and quick to appease, and quick to release the anger. Another area here where I think that we can often get triggered, I think we have some poor intellectual commitments that are almost the foundation of some of our thinking. And when those get attacked or destabilized, I think that can also be triggering. Let me give an example from something that was an op-ed just a few days ago in the Sunday New York Times that I think in a conversation I've had with some people has been destabilizing. Charles Blow wrote an op-ed in the New York Times around, are we really born that way? Are LGBTQ people really born that way? And that was a crucial argument for gay rights for decades. We're born this way. God made us this way. And to critique how I am is to critique God, right? Because that's just how I was made, right? But he argues the science is now against that. The science now is that there is not just a nature or nurture binary. Everything is a combination of nature and nurture. And that it's much more likely that queer people evolve to be so, in addition to perhaps some initial inclinations. And that why should we celebrate a 16-year-old who kind of comes out as opposed to a 60-year-old who feels they've evolved to such a state, right, of X, Y, and Z, that person should be less celebrated, so to speak. But he says that people are so committed to the born this way ideology that it's very hard to, destabilize that. And so I think that's just one example where an earlier scientific thought, becomes political. And once it becomes political, becomes embedded as kind of a moral commitment. And I think there's many other things like that. The idea of, are women like this or men like this, right? Going back to feminism, the early waves of feminism. We are equal. We are the same. We're fundamentally no different. Right? And then later waves of feminism would say, actually, my feminism is built on difference rather than on sameness. Right. And then the third wave that goes on and on. So it's like the very commitments to what we argue for in the name of equality or justice, sometimes those intellectual commitments shift. And then we feel, ooh, well, can I shift that? Because then I look wishy-washy if my intellectual foundation is different for what I'm arguing for. But how can we be a little bit more willing to, still hold a moral compass, but be willing to challenge or be open to questioning some of those, basic commitments that underlies that idea. So yes, I just opened up a can of a lot of stuff. So,
Rabbi, can I respond?
Yes, David. Yeah, please.
I
David,
know I've already talked.
That's okay.
Quickly, as a gay man. I think it's all about respect. Respecting other people for their choices or their lives. Other people should not be telling people not to be gay or not to be Jewish, or questioning whether Kamala Harris is black enough, or telling people, you're a good Jew or a bad Jew. People identify their being. If someone says I'm so-and-so, believe them. If I'm hurting, believe them, and it's a matter of respect and not telling other people what to do. My thought.
Great, David. Yeah, thank you for weighing in. I appreciate that. It's, there's a fundamental moral commitment of respect that we need to rebuild in the country, that goes beyond whatever some of those, paradigm shifts in thinking, relate to. And I would love to see us all as VBM ambassadors, as ambassadors in the world for modeling this and living this, of showing this level of respect, and even doing that for groups that type of group really, is distasteful to us. Finding a way to, fight against the evils that we see in the world, but maintaining that level of respect. So, rather than, questioning, are you black, or questioning why you're Jewish, or questioning why you're fill in the blank. So, anyways, David, thank you for that. Great. All right. Who else wants? Oh yeah, Cheryl, you're going to hop in.
Just a couple things. In our house growing up, if someone was late, the expression was call the highway patrol. So you talk about worrying, that we were always called that, but we always said we should call the highway patrol. Anyway, I really appreciated your comment personally about anger versus anxiety being a trigger, because I'm just sitting here thinking, am I angry or am I anxious about something? And I think it takes you have to then go inside yourself and examine, well, what drew you or brought you to this point? What brought you to brought me to the pit in my stomach, or my need to leave the room when I hear a particular voice on the television, for example. But, is it angry or is it anxiety? And then how to deal with it too. And I know in this political climate, especially over the past several years, a lot of friendships have dissolved, and that makes me very sad. And Stan and I have really we feel like we walked a fine line. People know where we stand, but we also cherish our friendships, that we've had for a long time. And these are basically good people. They just might be a little misguided right now, but whatever, they know where we stand. And I think it's important for people to know. You have to be comfortable enough to let people know where you stand, and they can reject, to a point, because otherwise, that's where walking the fine line comes in. You can't say, I think that we have to be able to say, well, I think I'm right. You have your own opinions, but I think I've seen a lot of friendships break up, and that has really given me some sadness and given me pause. So
Yeah, thank you for that. Friendships are such a cherished thing to hold, and are also so heavy to lose. And yet, sometimes friends can be the most triggering of us because of how close they can be to us, and how much we can share with them, and yet still feel so far apart. And yeah, sometimes it is best to create distance, even if it creates sadness. And other times, but when we see groups of friends where one couple or one person starts to kind of be triggering for the entire group, sometimes it can serve the health of the community or the group to have that distance as well. You know, um, if you've ever been on a board, one of the ways we can know if we're being triggered, you ever been on a board where there's a little bit of a toxic personality on the board? I'm sure nobody's ever had that, right? Never seen that, right? So let's say there's 20 people on the board, and 19 of the people really values aligned. You're working well together. It's collaborative. It's respectful, but there's that one person on the board who is just, you know what I mean? So as soon as you realize that every time you open your mouth, you're really speaking to see how that one reacts instead of how the 19 collaborate, we know that they've taken control of us, that they've triggered us to the point where we're no longer leading from that place. We have to find a way that we're still talking to the 19 collaborative folks as opposed to the one derailer, And I used to find that when I was giving a talk in a community, if there were 200 people like this when I was talking, I was only watching the one guy in the back going like this. I was obsessed with the guy like this in the back. I don't care the 200, and I got to the place and, you know what? Let that guy have a great time. Let him get a neck exercise, it's a gift that he's getting the neck exercise today. And I'm going to enjoy the other folks who are engaged with me differently. Now, as Eileen said earlier, it is a great person to talk to after because there's something to learn from. I did sometimes find actually that the person wasn't disagreeing. It was just the personality of the person to kind of act like that. Like they're shaking their head no, like they're disagreeing with themselves or something, But at any point, yes, what you're saying is really great around friendships. And I think that's something for us all to kind of think about, because some of this is our work. How do we control our triggers? But some of it also is surrounding ourselves around people that don't make it impossible for us to not be triggered, And I've decided to create some distance from some of those people that it's just too much. It's just too much to constantly have to feel emotionally on guard. Okay, hi, Matthew.
This is more directed at Stan. But when you were practicing law, wasn't one of your jobs to take your client triggered and wanted to do something and talk them down to a better position? And at the same time, the question is, how do you do that yourself when you're having the same when you're triggered? And I'm thinking that very often in business, consulting, my job would be to undo the triggers in people and move the projects forward. But I find in my own life, at the same time, triggers stop me from doing that. So Stan, any thoughts on this?
In my business, we always call it client control. You have to have some client control. You have to keep your client sane. And part of it is keeping your client as likable as possible. Because in the end of the day, just like politics, if the judge or the jury doesn't like your client, you got real service. So yeah, there is a big thing of control. The other thing is compromise. I was sitting here thinking that the older you get, the less likely you are to be triggered. It takes a whole lot to get you upset. It should take a whole lot to get you upset. Whereas if you're Shmuly's age, you could hit that button and then watch it go. But anymore, it's just he just accept, well, this is the way that is, and try to make things better. But no, you're correct about clients. They have expectations. What you try to do is lower their expectations and then exceed them. So I think that's the what you try to do. You don't want to tell them, oh, guarantee them a good result, because there are no guarantees. So yeah, that's what
Very
I do.
nice.
I was saying also, Shmuly, the last comment about a board, what I consulted with, there was one bad actor, and he was on the spectrum. And it got to the point when nothing got done. And our recommendation to the board was, you have a right to appoint an executive committee. They appointed an executive committee, the entire board except him, and said, we will meet in executive session each year, not Arizona, so you don't have to worry about public meeting, but we'll give you one more shot at an open board meeting. And for one meeting, he controlled himself, and then he went out of hand, and then they went into executive session for 6 months without him, and then they gave him another shot. Unfortunately, he had a core group of people who got him reelected every year. And that was the only way to get anything done, was you gave him a shot. If he played nice, then he could continue. Otherwise, he went into executive session with 8 members instead of 9.
Yeah, for folks who aren't familiar with what we're talking about, I'm very fortunate at VBM to have that we have a very healthy and a very healthy board, and people there all for the right reasons. But it is known in the Jewish world, particularly in the synagogue board world, that many people join the boards for wrong reasons, and it's much more about power, influence, self. Of course, there's many exceptions to this, but if you've never been on a synagogue board, you might not know what I'm referring to. But this is not a rare thing, that people go to hear themselves more than to actually, support the institution. In any case, back to the attorney business. I'm about to meet after this class with a divorce attorney. No, I'm not getting divorced, but I'm meeting with a divorce attorney, and I'm going to ask his view also on the triggers, because, Stan being in the financial world, that's very triggering, and divorce might be the most of all. But it says in the Talmud, 3 things reveal a person's character: kaso, koso, kiso. And it's intentionally supposed to sound similar. Kaso, koso, kiso. Kaso is a person's anger. Koso is how someone acts when they drink, and kiso is how someone reacts to financial matters. That one's real character emerges when they get angry, when they drink a lot, or when they are in a financial dispute or the like. And that really resonates for me. And those are 3 triggering things. And maybe you can think of your own 3 of the 3 types of things that we can be on guard for. Hi, Gary.
Hello, everybody. I want to address what Stan said for a moment, and then something that David mentioned. I think as we get older, we become much more comfortable in our own skin. And with things that I look back that were my triggers are no longer my triggers, because wisdom has a thing you get when you get older, and things that would just blow me out of the water and I'd be upset for weeks and weeks. Oh, well, time to move on. There's bigger things in the world. And I think that if we could think that, I wish we could think about that when we were younger than when we have aged. The other thing I wanted to mention was David's comment about accepting people for who they are. Being in the science world most of my career, we have a tendency at times to look at science to try to justify our reactions, and that may be true if you're looking at your DNA or a chemical experiment, but we're trying to determine why somebody is queer based upon science, and I think we get lost in the mishmash of where we are in politics to try to justify why we should or shouldn't treat people equally, and that just bothers me. Sometimes we can't find the answer in science, and even if we did, does it make a difference? If someone is born this way, or somebody, and it could be that way with a disease. Does it make a difference if somebody is born with a disease or contracts it later on due to whatever? They're still human beings, and I think if we learn to see ourselves in each and every individual that walks the earth, I think we would be a whole lot better.
Well said, Gary. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Steve, you want to jump in, Steve?
Yes, thank you. And I'll make it very brief. I see we're short of time. One thing I've done during this meeting is negatively trigger myself. And one of my goals in life, because I don't like how placid I am at times, is to be the antagonistic member of the board. That is my goal. Somehow I want to get there. Number two, pickleball, and I know I hearken to this too much, has taught me that sometimes the change of context can alter the idea of being triggered. When you play pickleball, you have opponents, and sometimes the opponents are brash and braggadocio and will try to taunt you, and you get upset, especially if you lose. And then in pickleball, you rotate sides so that the person who was your enemy in the prior context will be your friend in this one. And so I've learned that what is happening is not necessarily tenacious, but could be temporary.
Very nice, very nice. You know, just to conclude on those points, I'm thinking about Simone Biles and her kind of heroic journey and her ability to care for her mental health in recent years and return. And just thinking about how much stronger we are in the world when we can take care of that. And like you said, Steve, untrigger ourselves. And you have never been an antagonistic. It's almost funny to imagine you being antagonistic. But yeah, thinking about how important that investment is. And also finding some security in the long arc of history. For some people, looking at the market yesterday was totally triggering. Oh my gosh, I just lost 3% of what, and probably like, whoa, this happens and it comes back. And like, I don't need to get all worked up. And that's, and there are some things that we can come to expect and come to allow and kind of de-trigger or untrigger ourselves. So friends, choosing leaders, we might think about how we screen for how people are managing their triggers. Excuse me, in screening for leaders that we want to follow or engage with, see how they manage around these things. There's many ways to detect it, and for ourselves to make sure that we are finding spaces to process so we can grow in our ability to change the world together. Have a great day. See you next week.